The hive cities of Necromunda retain the ancient names of the cities and settlements from which they grew. Each spire within a hive is also known by a local name. There are several thousand hives on the planet, some massive and populated by billions, while others are desolate and inhabited only by the dead. There are approximately 1,000 hive clusters on Necromunda, each cluster a group of up to a dozen or so individual hive cities, all linked by a network of underground travel tubes and subterranean passages.
Bruh.
The Palatine Hive, Hive Primus. The largest and oldest surviving hive on Necromunda is the dynastic home of Lord Helmore, imperial commander of Necromunda, known across the planet as the Palatine. The cluster it belongs to is known as the Palatine Cluster. The central and tallest spire of the Palatine Hive forms the palace of Lord Helmore. The Palatine boasts some of the most grandiose and magnificent architecture on Necromunda, and also has the only shipyard and landing field large enough to take orbital carriers. It is thus the planet's only spaceport, a physical expression of Helmore's monopoly in off-planet trade. The fortress monastery of the Adeptus Astartes contingent, and the headquarters of the Adeptus Arbites on Necromunda, are also located in the Palatine Hive. The hive, the largest on Necromunda, is enormous in size, reaching from the surface to some 10 Terran miles into the air, and from the surface level to roughly 2.8 miles underground, although only the first 1.3 miles are habitable by non-mutant humans, and possesses a population greater than some of the human-settled worlds in the Imperium in their entirety. On the edge of the hive is a special spire, set aside for the aliens and abhumans who come to Necromunda from time to time in order to trade. Both squats and eldari are among those visitors which are housed on separate levels of this spire. The Palatine is thus by far the most cosmopolitan of all the hives of Necromunda, as the Palatine is the seat of Helmore's power. The hive's noble houses are in constant Byzantine power struggles in order to gain control of the hive and thus of the entire planet. The lower portions of Hive Primus are ruled by the so-called ganger houses, criminal syndicates of gangsters which ape the organization and style of the Necromundan nobility, and which also have some influence within the higher levels of the hive. The activities of the ganger houses can even affect the outcomes of the true noble houses' constant struggle for power and advancement within Hive Primus. The balance of power in Hive Primus is strictly maintained, and any attempt to destabilize it is shut down with brutal force. Thus, the Imperial House rules with an iron fist, while the noble houses and the lesser clan houses all hold such power that no one house dominates the others, lest the system as a whole collapse. Hive Tresor. Tresor means three sisters in the local Necromundan dialect. It is also called this because it has three huge spires which can be seen from a long way off by any traveller coming across the ash wastes from the south. Tresor is located on the edge of the Great Equatorial Waste, and is the southernmost frontier hive of the Great Palatine Cluster. Many important merchant clans are based in this hive, and it is the main trading depot for colonies going to or arriving from the southern hive clusters. The nomads who live out on the wastes and raid the convoys are a constant source of annoyance to its inhabitants. Tresor is also the scene of one of the most prolonged and vicious gang wars in the recent history of Necromunda. The manufacturing base of Hive Tresor is dominated by the sub-clans of House Orlok, but House Goliath has a substantial and increasing presence in its furnace sectors. The Uphive spires are infamous for the many so-called brat gangs, the restless scions of nobility who take a cruel delight in engaging in gang warfare with the commoners of the Underhive. They are particularly well known for the brightly painted and incredibly rare jet bikes that they ride through the thoroughfares and transit tubes, inflicting mischief and mayhem wherever they pass. Acropolis Hive. This is another old and elaborate hive city in the Palatine cluster. It is located at a very important intersection of several great road tunnels, and has always been a major center of trade on Necromunda. The Acropolis Hive is home territory for some of the most powerful merchant clans, whose widespread trading network extends across many of the hives of Necromunda. Desperate to share in this wealth, the Acropolis Hive attracts a number of large and sprawling shanties, which cluster around its base like a festering sore. The great houses all have a presence in the Acropolis Hive, but each is generally content to support the status quo. Nonetheless, House Delaque is known to ply a rich trade in information and intrigue here, profiting immensely from the merchants' numerous internecine wars. The Temenos. This is another hive in the Palatine cluster. One spire forms the headquarters of the ecclesiarchy on Necromunda, while another spire serves as the temple of the emperor deified. Colleges, libraries, and chapels occupy parts of the other spires. A priory of the Adepta Sororitas is located in one of the outer spires. This spire is often called the Sisters' Tower as a consequence. The population of the Temenos Hive are among the most pious and devout followers of the imperial cult. Many of the resident clans manufacture ritual items for the priesthood, while others work in the scriptorium, translating the wisdom of the priesthood into the many dialects of Necromunda. The temple spire is an architectural wonder, and its interior is a warren of naves, chapels, and crypts, vaulted ceilings and pillared halls. The diffused light is stained by refraction through crystal. Incense and the sound of chanting drift across the chambers. Here and there statues and holograms of the Emperor reside in secluded shrines. From here, confessors and missionaries are sent off to frontier worlds in the nearby star systems. Hive Temenos is a major power base for House Cawdor, whose subservient gangs scour the lower levels for heretics to cast out from above, and make constant war on any arrivals whose vision of faith differs slightly from their own. Quinspiras Cluster. The Quinspiras Cluster is situated on the edge of a virtually solidified sludge sea called the World Sump Ocean. At one time, when the sea was still navigable, the area included vast dockyards. These now remain buried deep within the undercity of the centrally located Quinspiras Hive. This hive city has 5 great spires, hence the name, which means 5 towers in the local dialect, which gives its name to the whole cluster. The cavernous warehouses of the ancient waterfronts have been in the scene of many savage gang wars, in particular between gangs subservient to houses Orlok and Delaque. The Skull. This derelict hive city is the largest of a cluster of 3 remote ruined hives. It is pierced by great holes, and from a distance looks like a great skull lying in the wastes. It is a famous landmark, and perhaps even worshipped by the local nomads. These 3 gigantic ruins are all that remains of the hives that were captured and occupied for a time by orc raiders. All contact with the cluster was lost for several Terran years, before the rest of Necromunda realized what had happened, and a campaign was mounted to clear them. This was the original reason for the establishing and dispatch of a Space Marine contingent to Necromunda, which has since become a permanent establishment on the Hive world. The Hives were besieged and destroyed during the campaign. Now the tops have become caved in and they lie abandoned and choked with dust. No one knows what fearful things have made their home amid the ruins of the skull, and even nomads and scavies fear to go near them. The Eye of Selene, locked in geostationary orbit 100 kilometers directly above Hive Primus, is one of the busiest orbital trading depots in the Segmentum Solar, the so-called Ring of Selene. The ring serves as the sole shipping nexus for the planet below, and it is the only means by which goods are authorized to be shipped to or from Necromunda, ensuring the Imperial House always receives its due. Victuals are shipped down to Primus and then sent out by land to other hives in return for manufactured goods heading the other way. Many a visiting merchant or administratum tithe factor has observed the seeming inefficiency of this system, but none would question its efficacy in maintaining the unquestionable power of House Helmore. Hive Secundus. There was a time when Hive Secundus was, as its name indicates, the second greatest hive city in all Necromunda. This was to change just over a Terran century ago, however, when Secundus fell victim to a gene-stealer infestation that is subsequently found to have been the result of unsanctioned research by the rogue Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest biologist Termiatus, whose research went so disastrously awry that agents of the Inquisition were forced to intervene at terrible cost. In the destruction that followed, Hive Secundus was submitted to such punishment at the hands of Necromunda's own planetary defense batteries that its central spire was toppled, crashing down to rest as a shattered fallen column across 10 kilometers of the wastes. As overpowering as their response was, it failed to rid Necromunda of the stain of the gene-stealer. The ruins found to be overrun by the Xenos creatures and their infected human kin among the feared gene-stealer cults. This cult was called the Scions of the Needle. The planetary defense batteries dangerously depleted. A ring of trenches and redoubts was drawn up around the ruin, and this has grown ever denser with each passing Terran year, manned by conscripts and penal troops from across the world. It is said that nothing can escape that ring of steel, but that it takes endless and relentless, constant watchfulness to ensure that it does not. The Xenos creatures continue this day to breed within the shattered hive, engaged in a constant war of survival with the descendants of the human survivors, who now exist as feral savages long ago abandoned by their fellow Necromundans. Like the great dynastic houses that rule them, Necromunda's hive cities can rise and fall in their fortunes. Hive Mortis is a victim of its own success. Once an industrial linchpin of the equatorial hive city clusters, it enjoyed a great favor among the planetary elite. Its high yield of machine goods brought its rulers wealth and an enviable place among the imperial tithe standings. Millions of workers once filled its tunnels and its domes within the ceaseless sound of their toil, while the great houses fought over the fruits of their labor. The first shadows of disaster were subtle in their coming, a sickness that slowly infected the underclasses and winnowed away their numbers. The first of the deaths were lost among the attrition of the work clans, discounted as seasonal spikes in mortality, but soon even the housemasters could not deny the meaning of the statistics. A plague had come to their hive city. When word reached Lord Helmore, his reaction was swift, and Hive Mortis was sealed by imperial order. For Terran years, the plague ravaged the hive, and soon the dead outnumbered the living. In the chaos, the houses strove for power, as they fought bitterly over what was left. As battle raged, whole sections of the hive had to be sealed off, tunnels stacked floor to ceiling with corpses. Eventually the sickness abated, having burned itself out after devouring more than 20 million souls. In his benevolence, Lord Helmore rescinded his order and allowed the Hive City to open its gates once more. Hive Mortis, however, is a changed place that thrives no longer upon the creation of machines, but rather the industry of death. With their massive human resources gone, the ruling houses turned to the only thing that they had in abundance: the dead. Mortuary cults were created, and manufactoria turned to the harvesting and breaking down of corpses. House Escher has risen to dominance among its peers in Hive Mortis, extracting and fermenting drugs from bodies, though their death-maiden gangs do not go unchallenged. The houses still fight just as furiously as they did when Hive Mortis was at the height of its power, although the tempo of the battle has changed. Small communities shelter in the empty vastness of domes and levels constructed to house millions, their citizens still fearful of travellers and the return of the plague. Gangs rove this wasteland of hollow hab blocks and abandoned sectors, fighting over vaults packed with corpses, or else trying to force their way into sealed chambers to plunder the desiccated wealth within. Gothruul's Needle. Hive Primus holds a monopoly on off-world trade and is Necromunda's gateway to the stars, its keys held tightly in the hands of Lord Helmore. It was not always so. Gothruul's Needle, its spire rivaling the height of Hive Primus, was one of Necromunda's first spaceports, and its upper levels are still festooned with docking platforms and terminus stations for orbital craft. Yet it was not just because of its place as a trade rival to Hive Primus and the ascendancy of the Palatine cluster that Gothruul's fortunes were seized upon. Gothruul's Needle is ruled by the most dangerous and pernicious of governmental forms: democracy. A council of elected representatives control the interests of the Hive City and regulate the activities of the great houses, ensuring the fair treatment of its citizens and safety for all. Considered as insidious as any Xenos threat or chaos cult infestation, the houses of other hives have tried for many Terran years to bring down the rulers of Gothruul. When cutting them off from orbital trade did not diminish their wealth and power, the houses began a long shadow war. Gangs and gang warfare are prohibited by the Gothruul Council, and the clan houses are tolerated upon the proviso that they keep their populations in check. Even so, criminal elements run rife in the lower levels of the Hive, and Gothruul's citizen protection officers, the Hive City's volunteer Enforcer cadres are constantly tested. House Delaque is a principal player in the destabilization of Gothruul's Needle, its subservient gangs routinely committing acts of sabotage and murder. From the sump-choked depths of the Hive, Guvros, the most powerful of the Delaque overlords, wages his war of terror. His gangers raid the upper levels, attacking hab parks and exchange plazas, one blow after another against the council. Guvros has become a legend among his house, and scores of Delaque gangs have come from other hives to join his fight. Though the Democratic Council of Gothruul might be the house's ultimate enemy, it does not stop them fighting among themselves, especially if the perceived fall of the Hive city government draws near. They all want to be ready to swoop in and claim as much power as they can. Some gangs even fight on the side of Gothruul, hoping to tip the scales back against their rivals, should any of them seem too close to claiming final victory. Thus the shadow war for Gothruul's Needle rages on, never quite finding resolution.
Subscribe!